Welcome back to Bumblebee. I'm your host, Taylor McWaters.
I'm Olivia Kozlowski.
Here are the top 10 dark Norse mythology stories that will confuse you, hopefully. Right. Starting our list off at number 10, the disappearance of the Norse. Norse mythology is fascinating yet mysterious, of course. They settled in Greenland around 1000 AD, and they settled for over 400 years, and then just like that, they disappeared. But not without leaving their mark first. Vikings invented hockey, they skied, women had a large amount of rights compared to what we usually see on this channel, right? That's a given. But one of life's greatest mysteries is where Greenland's Vikings went. Like I said, they disappeared, right? The only remains that are left are crumbling church walls that were used for not even 500 years. This is baffling. Archaeologists are still unsure of what happened to the Norse population. Maybe it was a plague, maybe it was the Inuit, or perhaps they settled back in Europe. Again, it's really hard to tell. Recent excavations provide hints that they settled in the West, most likely relying on trade to survive. So maybe they followed the goods and then they left naturally. Who knows? They used to call hockey Nadalikir. That's all I know personally. So
in our number 9 spot today, we have the creation myth. Going right back to the beginning of things, the Norse believed that the universe emerged from an empty space separating the world of ice and fire. The first creature to come into being in the Norse creation myth was the giant called Ymir. He is said to have been born from the moment the fire from Muspelheim and the ice from Niflheim met in the abyss of Gunnin-Gaga. Ymir had the ability to conceive asexually, and his offspring spontaneously sprang from his armpit sweat and his legs. This is how Ymir became the mother and father of the Jotuns, who would later go on to become the enemies of the Norse gods. But eventually, Buri came into existence. Buri went on to have the grandchildren Vili, Ve, and Odin, we all know Odin, who decided to create the world and fill it with life. But unlike the Christian ideals and concept, the Norse deities couldn't just create life out of nothing. So naturally, they just killed Ymir and made the world out of his body. The sky was made from his skull, his brains became the clouds, his blood turned into the oceans, and his teeth were mountains and rocks. This gave even more power to the three brothers, who then gave life and intelligence to humans. This creation story is thought to have really influenced the way that the Norse saw the world. They were living in a universe that was only made possible by death.
Number 8, Norse or Viking. You may have asked yourself during this video already, or at some point in your life, what is the difference between Norse and Viking? I watched Norsemen and now I want to bark at dogs. That's my new dream job, just to bark at people all day, I guess. Norse and Viking both refer to the same group of people who both settled in Scandinavia in the medieval times. Now this all happened again around 1000 AD. The Norse are Norsemen, right? Guys who bark at dogs, you know, all that kind of stuff. The Vikings are also Norsemen, but they're just a little younger and a bit more, a bit more energetic. A lot of this, a lot of this. A lot of height, you know what I mean? The Vikings were seafaring warriors, while the Norsemen were involved in farming and trade and that sort of stuff. So there you go. Now you know the difference.
In our number 7 spot today, we have golden apples. Golden apples are an incredibly important part of Norse mythology because of the fact that they need to be continually eaten by the Norse gods in order to maintain their immortality. It's not just like a free ticket, alright? They gotta consume a lot of golden apples. The apples also supplied the gods with their strength, as well as their forever youth. The orchard that contained these apples was looked over by the goddess of spring, Idun. I don't know how to say that, so I just went for it. The apples are extremely important to the mythology, and in one story, when the goddess gets tricked into giving herself and the apples over to Loki, the gods immediately grew old and weak, but luckily she was returned and everyone's youth was restored. This led people to search for these golden apples at one point, like real humans. But even if they were to find one of these magic apples, you'd need a constant supply in order to maintain your immortality, and that might be more difficult than you think.
Number 6, Viking Funerals. I really wish we still did Viking funerals. You know, every funeral I've been to in the last 5 years, it's all been a snooze fest. I'm like, yeah, they're old, we get it. Josh Groban, sure, let's change it up a bit. Where are all the horns? Where are all the flames? I want to feel like I'm at a Greta Van Fleet concert, right? Viking funerals came in many different shapes and sizes. Sometimes they would bury the body and leave stone circles around the graves. That's pretty badass. Or sometimes they would do burial mounds. That's also pretty badass. Vikings were pagans, so they believed that the more smoke during a cremation, the better, seeing as smoke was their way of reaching the afterlife. And in Norse mythology, both symbolize symbolized safe passage to the afterlife, so Vikings would shape these stones placed around the graves, they would shape them like a vessel. Or these mounds would be shaped like giant boats of some sort, which is again pretty epic. Beats Josh Groban every time. But high-ranking Norsemen, that's where the fun comes into funeral. High-ranking Norsemen would be buried with their actual real-life vessels. Yeah, they'd be buried with their ship. Imagine that for a visitation. You'd be like, oh my god, how do I even get in? In 834 AD, the Oseberg ship burial honored two women. The ship vessel was 70 feet long and 17 feet wide. 15 oars on each side. It was massive. It was discovered in Norway on a farm. So again, the whole shooting an arrow while they're at sea thing, it wasn't actually that common, as badass as it is. Because if you missed, well, you just gave away the Oseberg and you also botched the funeral. All in one. So, way to go.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Alfheim. This is actually a location that is said to be one of the 9 worlds in Norse cosmology. The 9 worlds are often highly debated, and this one is only mentioned twice in the Old Norse texts, but it is a very important place nonetheless. This place is said to be an abode of the elves, which are a class of demigod-like beings from this pre-Christian mythology and religion. Since this place isn't talked about very much in the text, there isn't a lot that is known about it, but it is said that only light elves live here, while dark elves live down in the earth, and that these two kinds of elves are unlike in appearance, but even more unlike in nature. This gets even more concerning when we take into consideration their description. Light elves are described as being luminous and, quote, more beautiful than the sun. Dark elves, on the other hand, are said to be blacker than pitch. Either way, the light elves are the ones who inhabit the land of Alfheim, and the land itself is looked over and ruled by the Vanir goddess Freyr.
Number 4. Horned helmets. When you think of Vikings, you probably imagine a very large man, right? With a giant beard, wearing armor covered in fur, and perhaps a helmet with a couple of horns sticking right out on the side. Nice and aggressive. We see Vikings depicted this way in movies, television, you name it. But was it historically accurate? Nay, no, false, not really. Well, aside from looking cool, this would have served no purpose in, an actual combat. Unless there was a guy specifically headbutting individuals, the horned helmet was not historically accurate at all. The horned helmets were only introduced into Norse culture when costume designer Carl Emil Doppler made them for Norse-themed operas in the 19th century. So, yeah, false. They just wore their heads. So big Viking heads.
In our number 3 spot today, we have Niflheim. This is a type of hell that comes from Norse mythology, and rather than being a fiery pit like a lot of us think of when we think of hell, it's actually a frozen landscape. This place is ruled by Hel, who is the goddess of death and the daughter of Loki. It is actually believed that her name might be where the name for the Christian underworld came from. I feel like I mentioned Christianity a lot in this. I don't know why. It's just a coincidence. Niflheim is located next to the shore of corpses, which is where Nidhogg lives. If you're wondering who that is, it's of course only the giant snake that feeds on the dead, because why not, I guess? There are said to be 9 worlds in Norse mythology, and Niflheim is the deepest and darkest one. It is said that souls are brought here by Hel's messenger, and from here the souls are simply just kept in constant pain.
Number 2. Go Berserk. Unlike the fancy horned helmets, Viking berserkers were real. That part was historically accurate. And let me tell you, these guys specifically, they were terrifying. These Viking warriors would arrive to battle decked out in bearskins. Now the term originally meant to change form, right? Berserker, to change form, Transformers, right? All the same kind of combat. So they were emulating a bear while walking into combat. Imagine being the other guy, you'd be scared shitless. Berserkers were considered a higher power when it came to battle. Yeah, no shit. They were the big dogs, or more accurately as they were described back then, mad dogs. More often than not, berserkers could take an opponent down with one single strike. How did they do it, right? Besides having a large build naturally, how did they win so many battles? How were they relied on so often? Today we have an idea of what may have helped aid the fight, and it's bad stuff. It's all illicit substances. Yeah, they would just do some not so great stuff and then run into battle screaming, hopped up on something. The odds that berserkers were on something going into every battle, those odds were pretty high. They're pretty high.
In our number 1 spot today, we have Ragnorok. Also known as the doom of the gods, we can't fully appreciate the new god of war without really knowing what this story is portraying to some degree. Ragnarok would have been the most feared word for the Norse, or perhaps a word that changed their outlook on the world. This was a fate that no one, not even Odin, could escape. At the time, there was a belief that there were different ages, the axe age, the sword age, the wolf age, so on, before the world would fall. There would then be 3 years of absolute chaos that included famine and sickness, and following this would be an all-out war in the heavens. This war would see the gods facing everything: Jotuns, giant wolves, giant serpents, and most importantly, Loki, who broke free from his chains and was ready for revenge. This fate saw the fall of the gods, and the fire giant Surt burned the entire world to ashes, killing almost every living thing. While this is a super depressing fate to believe the world will meet, there was a glimmer of hope. After Ragnarok, there was rebirth. It was believed that a new world would arise from the ashes.
Well, that was our list on Vikings. If you want some more of that, maybe you're playing God of War, keep the spoilers out of the comments. I'm not quite there yet myself, but when I do, you're not gonna see me for like 14 business weeks, to be honest with you.
I've been one of your hosts today, Olivia Kozlowski.
And I'm Taylor McWaters.
Bye.
Bye.